Welcome, everybody. Today is just an absolutely wonderful day. I get to do what I do and have a lot of fun with my guests. My name's Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group, and I've got an absolute special guest today. His name is Chuck McConnel, and he is the Executive Director for the Center of Carbon Management in Energy at the University of Houston. Welcome very much, Chuck. Appreciate your time.
Stu, it's a pleasure being with you. Thank you.
I tell you, I'm going to give our listeners here just a little bit of inside baseball. You and I were fortunate enough to be on a Mauldin financial panel a while ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed your industry insights and your knowledge on everything else. And being an educator, you really did a great job educating everybody on that panel.
Well, you're very kind and generous with your thoughts. It's interesting. I've had the pleasure of 35 years in the industry, working on projects, running businesses here, domestically and internationally, but also spending time at national laboratories, working as the Assistant Secretary of Energy at DOE, and now in academia. So it's a bit of a plethora of experiences, but I'm having a great time at a time when the energy transition's on the top of everyone's minds, too.
Boy, it is. And you are also a director over at the Carbon Neutral Coalition, correct?
Yes, I was asked by the leadership team, primarily organized through Corby Robertson and a lot of the other advisors, to lead the Futures Group, which is really about how Texas is going to achieve carbon neutrality and do it in a truly sustainable manner. And that's the needle that we all are challenged to thread.
Let me ask this, because sustainability means a lot of things to a lot of people. And in my opinion, sustainability means that you don't have to fund it with tax dollars. Is that what you mean?
Well, no, that's probably a little narrow, Stu. But what I would say from our standpoint, and we embrace this all the time, because when we say sustainability, we mean this. Okay. Number one, that energy be made and consumed and made available for all, and that it be reliably provided.
Nice.
That's really fundamental. That's a basic that we take for granted here in this country, but many places around the world cannot. But if you're able to have it available, then of course it needs to be affordable, cost competitive. Something that provides that basics for economics, so that you've got a commodity like energy that you can affordably consume. And then the third thing is that it be environmentally responsible. Now, sustainability often is hijacked as an environmental term. And it isn't just that, but it certainly does have the aspects of environmental responsibility.
You know, Chuck, I didn't mean to cut you off, Chuck, but that was an absolute fabulous definition.
Well, we think it's fundamentally important that people embrace it, because it's not a term you can just throw around with everyone's interpretation. It means something, and for us, it means a lot.
Well, some of the things at the University of Houston and your thought leadership there, tell us a little bit about that, and what are your main goals with what you're working on at the University of Houston, and then let's talk into some of the market features as well too.
Yeah, well, maybe just a little background, Stu. We formed the Center for Carbon Management about 5 years ago. And it was at the request of our Energy Advisory Board, which is made up of some 30 different companies that are part of the University of Houston's advisory network. The usual suspects in the industry, and all of them, to an enterprise, were all faced with the challenge of, what am I going to do about carbon management as we enter this energy transition period? Again, energy transition means a lot of things to a lot of people, but Many of our companies, obviously, are hydrocarbon-based companies,
Right.
producing the kinds of goods and services that are essential to the world, and recognizing that as we go forward, we need to make a conscious effort in terms of carbon management for sustainability. So with that in mind, they said to the university, look, we want to channel the engineering, science, policy, legal, business, all of these skills that are here at the university, we'd like to put those under one roof and be able to tap into that effectively and efficiently at the university. Right. And so the university set up the Center for Carbon Management for just that purpose, to really coordinate our internal efforts in terms of research and development and student workforce, et cetera, but also our external communications with those companies and many others, actually, that have decided to join our Center for Carbon Management, become part of our advisory group, help to shape the view of the research and work we're doing inside the fence at the university to match the real needs of the marketplace. And that's how you get relevance and impact in terms of what you're doing at a university. And so we think that's fundamental to the effort.
You know, when you take a look at CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and you take a look at the carbon net zero, and you take a look at Occidental Petroleum, there's several different ways. I've got about 16 different questions after what you mentioned. You take a look at, let's take big oil for a second. BP and all of the European big oil companies said, hey, we're going to go renewables. Poof, you know, they're going to go run down that road. And then the US actual oil companies did a little bit of a different turn. And then Oxy took a completely different turn and really jumped into the carbon capture market. They happened to be number one last year, Chuck, on the Fortune 500. So you think they got something right on that bad dog going that way, right?
Yeah, you know, Stu, let's unpack that just a little bit here.
Okay.
For your listeners. Okay. First and foremost, I think something that people don't recognize is when they say energy, to recognize that only about 40% of energy is in the form of electricity. So when you talk about electricity and going to net zero and things of that nature and the impact of renewables, et cetera, that's a portion of it. It's less than half of the overall equation. And so the rest of energy is in fuels and chemicals and building materials and all of the things that are a big part of the energy mix. And that too requires decarbonization. And so if you start to look at how we're going to approach taking the CO2 emissions out of the atmosphere, because Stuart, isn't that really what the challenge is? It's not about fuels. It's not about industries. It's not about trying to disassemble an industry and have a new one replace it. I mean, everybody gets kind of, I think, a little bit off track in terms of what the mission is. And the mission is to get less CO2 out of the atmosphere through decarbonization technologies. And so to your point about CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage has been recognized by the International Energy Agency as an essential, not an optional, an essential part of being able to achieve decarbonization targets for climate change. And so if you look at the application of CCUS across oil and gas, petrochemicals, electric power, manufacturing, cement, steel, go down the list of all of these essential industries, they're all throwing off CO2. They all want to do emissions reductions, and CCUS is the vehicle that's going to be able to address that, Stuart.
Isn't that great? And we're seeing such a resurgence of coal that if we really use CCUS in the coal, I mean, look at China. They're building out more new coal plants than in the rest of the world, 2 times the rest of the world. Where everybody's going back to coal because of the energy crisis.
Well,
I'd love to see that.
yeah, the big misunderstanding that many might have is that coal is dead. Well, it's not dead. In fact, it's growing globally. Okay.
Right.
Now, it's not growing in the US. We have the abundance and the good fortune to have alternatives such as natural gas, et cetera. Other places in the world, in some of the European areas, have made the choice to go very, very strong in other directions. And we can talk
Right.
about that in a second, what that really does. But the real fundamentals are that we're going to add another 3 billion people to this earth over
Right.
the next 50 years, most of them in developing countries, most of
Right.
them hugely dependent on fossil fuels already. And so the
Right.
Chinas, the Indias, the Indonesias, and frankly, the African nations that have the access to abundant coal reserves that
Right.
are incredibly affordable. The third leg on the stool is how do we make them environmentally responsible? And I think
Right.
that's the opportunity we have here in this country, not just to clean up our own emissions story
Right.
that we've done largely by shifting away from coal to natural gas and done a lot of really important things here. But the CCUS capabilities that we're able to develop here domestically to be
Right.
able to deploy them internationally is really the key to unlocking how we're going to decarbonize the world, not just our own backyard.
You nailed it. And I don't think that we're going to get to carbon net zero. I don't think we're going to get to carbon neutrality without leadership like Texas. We have talked in the past about how good Texas is using all types of energy, nuclear, wind, solar, coal. We don't care. And so I love the idea of going out and exporting the technology around the world to folks that still want to use coal. Let's get that thing as clean as it possibly can. They're going to use it anyway. But Chuck, the Carbon Coalition and what you're doing in Texas has worldwide ramifications because the power Texas leads the world in many different areas.
Yeah,
So,
well, Stuart, we have the luxury of having available and affordable natural gas. We've done a phenomenal job deploying renewables here in this state with wind and
right,
solar. And as we look at the coal fleet in Texas, many people don't realize we probably generate more electric power from coal than any other state in the country. Of course, we're bigger than everybody else and we celebrate that all the time, right? But at the end of the day, it's a reality. But the other reality is what you just said. People around the world have one thing in mind if they don't have energy. They
right,
want energy. They're going to use the most available and abundant and affordable fuel possible. They have access to coal. Many places in China don't have access to natural gas. You could
right,
say the same thing about Indonesia and India. They don't
right,
have access to many of these alternatives that we have. And so, yes, if we're going to assume they're going to electrify their world and
right,
create additional energy and for fuels consumption, yeah, they're going to use coal. Of course they are.
right.
And our challenge is not to pontificate to them with our ideology, but our
Oh,
objective is to
yeah.
deliver the technology that can make that happen.
I love the way you articulated that, Chuck. Absolutely wonderful. Because with the clean scrubbers and the newer coal plants that can actually run at a hotter temperature, they use less coal and less emissions if they can run hotter. Let's export the technology. Wouldn't that make sense?
Well, it sure would. And sadly, as you look around the world and you look at organizations, I would
Right,
call them imperialistic organizations, such as the World Bank, that make statements that we're not going to fund any fossil fuel projects around the world. It basically says we're going to leave people in impoverished circumstances and we're going to feel good about it because it's in the name of environmentalism. Well, I don't happen to subscribe to that.
I
I think
agree.
that's a very dangerous way to look at things, and it's pretty aristocratic as well. I believe that if the developed world takes the responsibility to develop CCUS in the manner in which it can be deployed broadly, globally, we're going to be able to lift those people out of energy poverty, and we're going to do it in a decarbonized manner. And that's the whole key. Right now, sadly, what many of these countries around the world are forced to do is, because they can't get funding from the World Bank and because the European Union says they shouldn't use coal, they turn to organizations like China for third world technology, and they're deploying coal plants in places around the world that have enormous emissions. And that is not a solution. That's just a political agenda that isn't very productive.
And it's counterintuitive. Oh, Chuck, I'm sorry, you're going to get a round of applause here because I'm over here in the Chuck cheerleader crowd now because that was well articulated. The forcing your views on people and your way of life is not the way to get people out of poverty and get them raised up. Low cost energy with the least amount of impact on the environment is the way to elevate humanity out of poverty.
Yeah. Well, and Stuart, not to sound too patriotic here, but it is sort of the American way, isn't it? It's capitalism, and it's also taking advantage of the capabilities and the expertise that one has to develop markets, have them be commercial, and have them be recognized for the value they create. And that really gets to the essence of the carbon neutral coalition that you mentioned earlier in today. That's the whole story around Texas. We have hydrocarbon-based industries. We provide the world's energy, and that's not going to change. But what we have an opportunity to do is create differentiation in the products that we produce by lowering the carbon intensity of those products. And if you look around the world and you say, where's the leadership going to come from? It's going to come from states like Texas that are developing technologies to make those products the manner in which they can be recognized in an international market.
And the story that you're telling, and I just really love my interview with Susan Combs. She is just a true class act, and a part of the coalition as the chair. And the leadership that you guys are bringing together is just truly amazing. But it's the education. How is the coalition going forward in this education space? Because I think that you and I can have a wonderful conversation. You and I are going to just sit here and agree together. But I'm on a mission, and I think you're on the mission as well, as to articulate this to folks that don't. What's coming around the corner for you and the coalition, and how to bring the news to folks?
Well, I'll tell you what we've done already, Stuart, in our website is to include a number of videos for consumption between 2, 3, 4 minutes, explaining some of the technologies, providing that educational construct for folks. And so I would encourage people to go to the Carbon Neutral Coalition website and consume those videos. We call them the solutions that are available to us. As we look into the future, how do we more broadly get this message out? And again, the message isn't necessarily an agenda, it's the facts. It's absolute factual story that without, we won't make smart decisions. And so as an example, and our University of Houston Center for Carbon Management, we've recently created an executive education course that can be consumed online over an 8-week period. And it's all about carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And it's taught by industry experts, some of the most internationally recognized CCUS experts that you could possibly imagine. They're part of that course. And for people to actually be able to consume this for executive education, be recognized by the university, but probably for their own jobs their own personal development, et cetera. We hope to have this into the marketplace as early as May this year. I can certainly provide information to people about how they might want to register for something like that and be a part of it, and to be able to interact with some of these subject matter experts as well, you know?
Just the interaction, talking to people is critical. Let us know how we can help spread that word to get that out there for folks, because it's one thing to have a degree in finance, but I think having the subject matter degree for CCUS is going to be actually needed in the future.
Well, Stuart, along that same line, I think the other challenge that we all recognized is everything right now is not perfect. And so as the legislative session is together in Texas, we're addressing a lot of interesting areas around infrastructure, mineral rights, land rights, permitting issues associated with CCUS. In many ways, somewhat of a nascent industry as we're getting into commercialization. We're transitioning away from institutional research and projects and really looking at something that can be commercially deployed on this kind of scale that's going to make the impact. That's what everybody's wanting to do. And so what we're trying to do is also make certain that our messaging gets to the legislators, to their staffers. Everybody's smart, but they've got 100 other issues that they're dealing with. And so how do we provide that consumable educational material for people to recognize the opportunity, what it's going to take to get there, and then having Texas become effectively a leader in moving CCUS forward? We've got all the attributes. We've got all the physical attributes. Having that policy ability to support that and move it forward, that's essential. And I'll tell you what else is essential, and we've got that too. A lot of smart people from the industry. They know what they're doing. They're able to actually deploy a lot of their skills into this new area of CCUS, which again, you talk about US companies, leveraging their capabilities, leveraging what they know how to do well, and be able to advance CCUS, leveraging that kind of capability. That's what it's all about. And that's frankly what we're trying to do in this country, is to create broad commercial deployment of a technology that we've invested 20 years worth of institutional research and DOE funding and everything else. And it's time for that to pay off, because we don't have a choice. We got to make it happen.
I like the way you think, Chuck. Absolutely. And I am so excited to see that training come out and get that word out there. What's coming around the corner for you, Chuck?
Well, for us, first and foremost, I think as we look at opportunities in the marketplace, and we look at the companies and the enterprises that are really desiring to make this transition to a lower carbon future, we're also looking at leveraging some of the facilities and the capabilities that can come from some of these grants that are coming from the Department of Energy. They're coming from the infrastructure bill. It's a recognition by the administration that these industries, this industry in particular, will need support. But that's not just carbon and carbon CCUS activities, but it's also hydrogen. And the synchronicity of hydrogen and the CCUS network, and the importance of both being able to move that forward in our future, really essential. So through the work that we're coordinating at the university, and largely with a lot of our industry partners that are part of our carbon CCUS broad deployment consortia through the Southern States Energy Board, working in concert with the Department of Energy, we've got over 75 companies that are collectively working on advancing carbon capture, utilization, and storage, advancing the concepts of these carbon hubs, all of the things that are associated with that, but also the hydrogen economy as well. And so I think People have made that transition. We don't want to do onesies and twosies anymore. We want to create networks and capabilities that are going to have that kind of impact because of the scale. And that's what it's all about.
Well, fantastic. Chuck, how can people reach out to you on your LinkedIn channel and on the website out for the Carbon Coalition? I'll have that in the show notes.
Certainly do it for the LinkedIn network, but I would also recommend anybody going to the University of Houston Energy website.
Okay.
And a lot of the activities that we have at the center in terms of symposiums, conferences,
Nice.
opportunities to interact in terms of our advisory board or become a member of our carbon management center. Love
Nice.
for that to happen. Similarly, as we work very closely with Houston and the Greater Houston Partnership and the Houston Energy Transition Institute, HEDI, working with them in terms of advancing commercial opportunities within the city and within the city and the Greater Houston network, but also through the Southern States Energy Board, and frankly, through the Department of Energy as well, because everybody's got an oar in the water. And we're all trying to work together to make this happen. That's the beauty of the public-private partnership.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, it is great. And you know, when it works, it does prove to be effective and results come from it. Arguing about things in terms of where your politics are or where you think something belongs or doesn't belong, look, it's all about the emissions. Figure out a way to lower those emissions and make our world better as soon as we possibly can. Let's not argue about ideology.
No, you got to have the oars on both sides of the boat, or you only go in one direction, and that's in the circle.
Yeah.
So thank you, Chuck, for coming along on this podcast. I cannot wait to get this out there for you. Please keep us posted on your classes.
Yeah, appreciate that. We will certainly do that, Stu. And I think the other thing that we can all be comforted by is that all of these companies that are out in the marketplace, often you'll hear criticisms from different corners that this carbon management is nothing but a ruse to perpetuate the fossil fuel industry. And nothing could be further from the truth. If you really have your heart in environmentalism and you're really thinking about emissions reductions, then you really got to think about carbon management, such as CCUS, such as the hydrogen economy, which are really going to be solutions, not just pontification.
I like the way you say that, Chuck. Thanks, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day.